Transforming codependence. Life and relationships. Relationships are one of the main reasons we're here, right? To find love inside another, inside ourselves, to see it reflected back. And often, most of us will have had that experience of falling in love in some way. You meet someone for the first time and there's a merging of essences and souls and a deep recognition and this huge peeling away of the layers as the intimacy opens, and then the heart is felt. And the heart space connects you, and the extraordinary energy that comes with such an experience. And in most cases, what happens is that after some time, that kind of honeymoon period, so-called, rubs off, and the relationship enters another phase. It changes, and the wound inside each person starts to become more apparent. And then challenges and difficulties arise. And there's that whole first process of like the kind of shock or the disappointment or the kind of coming back to earth phase that's very difficult, especially the first time you experience it or when you're younger. After some time and experience, you begin to realize, perhaps if you've had a few of these, then that it's a pattern inherent to all relationships at some level, or most anyway. And this is what we call the kind of falling or the rising or the coming of codependence. And when we say the word codependent, we mean what I'm talking about is inside every human being, there's a wound, there's a trauma of some form. And when two people come together, if in the beginning you don't see that, what happens after a while is the unconscious starts to kind of rise up through the surface of the relationship, and those two wound patterns or traumas start to have a relationship together. And so one triggers the other. One wound pattern triggers the other wound pattern. And that's when things get difficult and challenging and certainly interesting. And that's what we really mean, simply put, by codependence. So how do we transform this codependence? Because when your wound pattern is tangled up with another person's wound pattern, you no longer feel like you know who you are. You've lost your sense of grounding and stability. And it can lead to that kind of, dream of like the shattered dream, and then the wish, I wish this were different. I wish you were different. And all the projections and the blame, it's the other person's fault. It's this pattern that keeps reoccurring. And this is the work. This is the shadow work. In my work with the Gene Keys, we talk about this shadow work. We talk about, through a process called the Venus sequence, how these different wounds come together, trigger each other, interact with each other, and how then we set off on a journey to untangle these wound patterns so that we can find ourselves again and come back to that soul connection. It's a journey. So that's the first thing to really understand, is that no one virtually escapes this journey. And it's a journey of awakening. It's a journey of love. It's the oldest journey there is. Journey of forgiveness, journey of tears, journey of laughter, journey of all the emotions. And we're going to have to confront them before we arrive at that potential atonement, and that kind of enlightenment in a relationship. So it's, what we have to go through and is a separation of our wounding patterns, a disentanglement. And that means that at least one partner in the relationship has to start a journey of deep self-awareness. And I say at least one because this is a sort of mystery and a magical thing, is that it actually only takes one person in a relationship to break the pattern. Right? And often it's you. Whoever is listening to this, it's probably you, because you have enough self-awareness even to listen to this and to be interested in such things. Or perhaps you stumbled across this. And if you're still listening, then there's probably enough self-awareness in you to be the one that starts the process. And if you're lucky, it might be a dual thing. And so you both begin to work together at disentangling your wound. But if it's just one of you, then the first part of the journey is just learning where you begin and the other ends. And that's a real challenge. So you have to start taking ownership of your own emotions. You have to start seeing where you're blaming and projecting onto the other your own lack of love, self-love, and how it gets, or however it's coming out. If it's coming out as anger or some form of denial or some sort of kind of projected blame, and numbness, all kinds of different patterns it can emerge as. You have to get to know that pattern in yourself really well. What a journey that is. And then slowly over time, you can begin to dismantle that pattern inside yourself because your behavior changes. So you may find that you stop reacting to the chemistry of the wounding, with the other. And it is a chemistry. It's a chemistry field. So if you pull out your kind of pattern, you pull out from doing that reaction pattern, the other person is suddenly left really wobbly. Because there's a certain weird stability to codependence, That's why couples go on for years and years and years, and they don't really kind of get along very well, and they argue a lot, and they fight and all of that. And they can go on for like 20, 30, 40 years because there's a certain stability to it. But it's an unhealthy stability because, the pattern itself is not allowing the deeper love underneath to come to the surface. And of course, that's what we want. And so from codependence, the potential is we start to move towards independence. And if one of you or both of you start to take responsibility for your feelings, your emotions, and you start to come away and draw out of the blame game and really own your own feelings, your own anger, your own thing, and explore where it comes from inside you, separately from the relationship, perhaps with an expert or someone, a compassionate person that understands these things, or through a process or a program like the Gene Keys, then you begin to dismantle the pattern in you. And that's when it gets interesting, because the other person, as I said, is left suddenly without the pattern. And one of two things can then happen. They either come with you on the journey, and because they embark on their own journey and they see you taking responsibility for your feelings, and they kind of mirror that. They start to realize, wow, I can do this too. And that can be a beautiful journey, because you then trigger their growth, their learning, they're taking responsibility. And, it'll put them in a spin. It'll make them feel very vulnerable, which will probably trigger more in the chemistry. But you'll have to really hold your ground and hold your boundaries and hold your clarity and take care of yourself. And this is part of the process of disentangling. The other thing that can happen is that person is so addicted to, because it's an addictive pattern, codependence, is so addicted to it that they freak out and they can't stay in the relationship, and they can't stay with you. And so sometimes the relationship has to end because they can't stay with you, and they become impossible to live with because they won't take any responsibility for their own feelings, and they're just constantly blaming, and you're owning. And that means over a period of time, if they can't come with you on the journey, then the relationship isn't really going to go anywhere, and sooner or later it's going to find a natural ending. So this is the route to independence, sometimes people make the mistake of thinking, well, it's not entirely a mistake. It's a different route. There's kind of two routes. And one is that you cut the relationship because you want your independence, you want your freedom, and you want to kind of grow and take awareness for yourself, develop your self-awareness. So you finish the relationship. The problem with that is that you can't work through the pattern live. You've finished it at one level, but then when you come back into another relationship, sooner or later it will come out again. So you sort of have to backtrack, even if you've done that move towards independence on the outside, when you're with someone again, the codependent pattern just returns in some form. Subtle at the beginning often, and then gets stronger. And so you end up in the same situation of, I've got to finish this again because to get my freedom, to kind of find love again. And so you look somewhere else or you find another way. The other way is you move into the codependence. And this is what I recommend. You move towards it. You see, every part of our nature, of our instinct, is to move away from it, to get away from the pattern. But if you have the courage to move towards it, and even if you can move into it together, that's an extraordinary thing. You can take subtle steps to work through these patterns, and moving into the codependence is what actually is where all the work gets done all up front. So you then don't have to kind of come back into another relationship and kind of do a whole load more work, because you haven't done it. You've done it outside the relationship, where you can't really do it properly, fully, because you need to be in the chemistry field to really be able to feel the charge. And that's the only way you can test yourself. Is my self-awareness greater than the charge, the emotional charge? Can I maintain self-awareness whilst this emotional charge is going on? And if you can, that's where the love starts to come back, because you can begin to dismantle and you can honor your own wounding pattern. You can honor it for what it is and see it and learn and get to know it. And the other person can get to know theirs. And then you begin to become interdependent. So you move from independence, where you've sort of separated out and learned, this is me, this is you, this is my pattern, this is your pattern. And there's a certain distancing in that stage. And then after like a while of doing that, decades probably, in reality, interdependence appears where you have both. Like the love is connecting you more deeply. The soul connection is returning, but it contains the wound at the same time. So you have everything, and that's a whole relationship. That's a holistic, real relationship, not one of these sort of pink, fluffy fairy tale ones. It's real and gutsy because you've done the work and you're still doing the work and it never ends. But the intimacy just goes on deepening and deepening and deepening. And in fact, what often happens as you grow older with someone is your differences become more and more apparent. And some part of you may even grow further apart because you're following your interest, they're following their interest. Interests often don't go in the same direction, especially as you get older. Not always, but the soul will keep you together. If there's that soul connection and that love has been there and all that work's been done, the interest is just part of your difference of your personality. And actually, your differences then become a major part of your intimacy because it's interesting, when you don't have to sort of go over to that person's path and try and kind of follow them and get to know them there. That's just what makes them different from you. And that difference, that distance, actually makes the heart grow fonder, So in a sense, the more you know the other person, the deeper the chasm of the mystery between you becomes, And this is codependent. This is how we transform codependence. We pull out those barbs and hooks that connect us to the other person, these invisible strings, that connect you like two fishing lines that are hooked into each other. And you pull out the hook in your side, and there's another one, you pull that out, whether it's blame or whether it's, betrayal or whatever it is, you start pulling them out. And then you're just left with you. And the other person's left with them with all these hooks dangling off. And they're like, oh my God, what is this? And that is the movement towards independence from codependence. And then finally, this beautiful state of interdependence where everything is contained, where the wound is allowed to be the wound and someone's allowed to kind of, express any emotion because they know how to express it in safety without projecting it. And even if you do project it a little bit, you recognize your self-awareness has grown, and so you recognize the projection. It doesn't take long. Or the other one maybe mirrors it back to you, and you get it, and there's some humbling, and it is a process of humbling, This is the journey of love, of true love. People talk about true love. This myth of true love. True love lies through a lot of work. It does not come on a plate. So you need to understand that. And so if you come towards these teachings and my teachings, you will see that I will encourage you as wherever possible to stay in relationships as long as possible, as long as it's not abusive and you have a soul connection and you're willing to work with each other. That is an incredible opportunity. But you got to put in the hours and the days and the months and the years. It's the years that make the difference. And that's quite a thing. And in some people's case, they do it through multiple relationships. That's a different path. It's not a path I can talk about because it's not my path. I don't know anything about it or whether it works. All I can give you is what I have learned, and that this is how I have transformed and continue to transform codependence wherever I see it and feel it in my relationships, and particularly my intimate relationships, with my partner and my deep friends. So I hope this is of use to you, and you take it. If you want to take it deeper, you might want to come into one of my teachings called the Venus sequence, which is exactly this work. It shows you your wound pattern, another person's wound pattern, and it helps you to do that disentangling and gives you support in doing it. So you might want to think about that, and then you'd be warmly welcome. Thanks very much for listening to me.